Ellen McGuire, and I'm the Director of the Education Policy Program here at New America. For those of you who are new to New America, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, progressive think tank here in D.C., and we're dedicated to new ideas to address the next generation of challenges facing the United States. New America's Education Policy Program consists of 3 areas of programming: the Early Education Initiative, Higher Ed Watch, and the Federal Education Budget Project. All of our initiatives are dedicated to advancing the cause of equity, access, and excellence in education. Today, the Education Policy Program and the Federal Education Budget Project welcome you to the release of our new report, Bridging the Gap: How to Strengthen the PK-16 Pipeline to Improve College Readiness. This paper outlines the current college readiness and remediation crisis in America and provides recommendations for bringing pre-K through 12 and higher education together to better prepare students for college and the workforce. We're going to begin in a moment with a brief video, followed by an introduction of the paper. But first, I'd like to introduce you to the 3 individuals to my right. First, we have Michael Watterson. Michael is the director of the Campaign for High School Equity, an unprecedented partnership of 9 of the nation's major organizations representing communities of color. The campaign believes that every high school should have the capacity and motivation to prepare every student for graduation, college, work, and life. At the campaign, Michael oversees the coalition's federal policy agenda and its public outreach and education activities. Mervyn Jenkins is the Assistant Director for the Eastern Territory of Advancement via Individual Determination, commonly known as AVID. AVID is a 4th through 12th grade system designed to prepare students in the academic middle for 4-year college eligibility. In his role as Director of AVID's Eastern Division, Mervyn oversees the growth of AVID from Maine to Florida. He has also worked as a teacher, a school administrator, and an entertainer. And finally, we have Bob Templin. Bob is the president of Northern Virginia Community College. Under his leadership, NOVA has created a strategic plan to increase college access for an additional 10,000 students from low-income and immigrant communities. As part of his work with NOVA, President Templin has championed closer working relationships between the college and local high schools. Each of these individuals is currently working in the field with the topic at hand. I welcome all of you today and look forward to hearing more.
College and career readiness is non-negotiable in today's global economy, but far too many students leave high school unprepared for the rigors of college and the workplace. Nearly 1/3 of all incoming freshmen require remediation before taking college-level courses. Regrettably, most college remediation programs don't provide their students with the support that they need to succeed in their studies. Less than 1/3 of students enrolled in remedial reading courses obtain a postsecondary degree or certificate within 8 years. The costs are high for all of us. Remedial students who don't graduate from college leave school without a degree, underprepared for the workforce, and oftentimes with significant student debt. Businesses spend an average of $600 million a year on remedial skills training. Taxpayers find themselves paying for a student's secondary education twice, first in high school and again when federally subsidized student loans are used to fund remedial coursework. Low rates of college readiness are a failure of the education system as a whole. High schools have not aligned graduation requirements with college and workforce readiness standards. Colleges and universities have not made clear what students should know and be able to do when they enter college. Much to their dismay, many incoming freshmen arrive on campus only to find that they are unprepared for the rigors of their academic coursework. Clearly, the system is broken. We have to start making meaningful connections between high school and college level work so that students graduate from high school ready for college and the workforce. It's time for all of us to work together to bridge the gap.
Well, clearly the system is broken, and to reverse course, we have to make stronger connections between high school and college. To ensure this occurs, the federal government must partner with key stakeholders, colleges, states, and local school districts, and use its influence to leverage limited resources to create an efficient PK through 16 system. One where policymakers have set clear and attainable standards, place all students on a path to meet those standards, and do so within a larger framework. We at New America, to build such a system, recommend: first, having the federal government incentivize states to create and adopt national college readiness standards. Under the current education model, each state sets its own standards and determines, in isolation, what constitutes mastery and success. As a result, our highly mobile student population moves through our nation's schools, gaining widely varying levels of knowledge and skills. We recommend requiring a high school graduation plan for every student and providing schools with the staff and the resources they need to create and monitor them. Most students who enter high school believe that they will go on to college, but have no idea what it takes to do college-level work. To resolve this disconnect, the federal government should provide states and districts with resources to ensure that every student has a high school graduation plan in place before the end of 9th grade. Developed by students, teachers, parents, and guidance counselors, these plans would set out the classes that students need to take to be prepared for admission to a 2-year or 4-year college or university. We recommend leveraging federal dollars to expand and improve upon existing early intervention college readiness programs. Many of today's students enter school academically behind and are rarely given the tools they need to catch up. Readiness and remediation programs can provide these tools. Some offer a bridge or academic leg up over the summer, some provide supplemental tutoring, and some provide one-on-one mentoring with adults. By supporting, strengthening, and in some cases refocusing our efforts, we can create a community of practice. We need to demand data. It's time to require colleges and high schools to collect and share publicly data on how their students are progressing as it relates to college readiness, remediation, and success. Only with better data can an adequate and appropriate response be developed, dollars be efficiently spent, and high schools and colleges be held accountable. Data, like sunlight, acts as a disinfectant, and with hard numbers available, the problems can no longer get glossed over in the language of only some or a few. And finally, we need to create a structure through which the states, institutions of higher ed, and secondary schools together can deliver remediation at little or no cost to students. All stakeholders share a responsibility for providing remedial education. The federal government can aid the efforts by conducting research on the types of programming that work, presenting states and colleges with best practice information, and seeding efforts to launch efforts that work. A state-based online college remediation coursework system could be developed with colleges and universities so that students can take their remedial coursework before they enter school in the fall. For those who prefer a more traditional classroom approach, remedial courses could be offered at high schools or community colleges over the summer. When remediation is offered on campus, colleges should hire additional instructional staff and ensure that these courses are as rigorous as any other at the university or college. For students who require one or more remedial classes, arrangements could be made with community colleges to offer remedial education, also referred to as developmental ed, at low cost close to their homes. Ultimately, we all share responsibility for graduating students ready for college and the workforce. Today, we're going to hear from 3 experts in the field, one who advocates for students, one who ensures college readiness in middle and high school students, and one who currently provides high-quality remediation on campus. So I hope that you'll join me in welcoming them. And we'll begin with Michael.
So, good morning or good afternoon. I'm sure all of you, like me, are really interested in knowing what it is Mervyn does as an entertainer. But I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit. Let me say, first of all, on behalf of the Campaign for High School Equity, how much we appreciate being a part of this conversation. We comprise 9 major civil rights organizations, including groups like the National Urban League, the NAACP, National Council of La Raza, the usual suspects, National Indian Education Association, and a variety of others. On behalf of our members, let me sort of sum up, if I can, right at the outset, that I guess from our perspective, we would say a hearty hear to everything that's been outlined in this report and the recommendations that are included. I think they're timely, they are right on point, they are sensible, and I think they move the conversation forward in some really significant and fundamental and important ways. What I want to do, however, is just highlight a couple of areas where I think we share some immense common ground as a way to give you a little bit more information as to how the Campaign for High School Equity comes at these issues. So the first thing I would say is one of the things that I usually do when I go around and I talk to people about the Campaign for High School Equity and what's going on in our schools, I usually will start out by playing a trick on the audience. And the trick I usually play is I will say to everyone, before we get started, perhaps we should observe a moment of silence. And the room usually goes silent, and people get these somber looks on their faces. And I would say, I'm sure, like me, you all heard about the kids that went missing yesterday. And the somber looks persist, and you see a few people in the audience going like this. What's he talking about? And then I'll say, you all didn't hear about this on the news. And at that point, everyone feels comfortable enough to say, no, no, no. And now they want to know. And that's sort of my way of leading into talking about the approximately 7,000 kids that drop out of high school each year, and how awful it is, I'm sorry, each day, each school day, and how awful it is that you and I don't hear about that. But what we do hear about is every move that Britney Spears makes and things of that nature. And so people begin to sort of sit up and pay attention. And then I begin to talk about the really awful economic impact of the dropout crisis in our country. I mean, if you just for a moment consider if between now and the year 2020, if we were to strengthen and increase the graduation rates for students of color, roughly to that of white students in this country, we would conservatively be able to add about $319 billion to our economy. You know, they say we're in the midst of a recession right now, and we're sort of talking back and forth about stimulus packages. It seems to me that the most appropriate and perhaps most far-reaching stimulus package is strengthening our high schools so that our kids are in fact college and work ready. Let me just say a couple of quick things in terms of some of the areas where our recommendations actually converge. Let me just say first, though, for the Campaign for High School Equity, we believe accountability is key. And that is an issue that we do not and believe we cannot retreat from. And so we start with the idea that schools must be held accountable for student success. We believe there can be no if, and, or buts about that. If we start with that fundamental standard, that schools have a responsibility with support, federal support and state support, but that schools have a responsibility to ensure that all kids graduate from high schools proficient and fully prepared for college and for the modern workplace. If that is our standard, then we've got half the battle beat. Now, there are obviously a number of ways that this can be accomplished. We completely agree with you in your discussion regarding longitudinal data systems. If you ever get a chance to look at our plan for success, which essentially is a document that embodies all of our federal policy recommendations, that's one of the more important recommendations that we have in there. We also spend a lot of time talking about the degree to which policies should pay attention to the specific needs that ELLs bring to the classroom and the degree to which assessment instruments may or may not pay appropriate attention to those specific needs. We also spend a lot of time talking about the way in which states define graduation rates, but more importantly, we talk about the fact that we believe that states should be required to increase their graduation rates over time, and that those increases should be both continuous and they should be substantial. Now, many of you who have been in this space for some time are very familiar with the arguments that have been had all over this town and all over this country about what those increments should be. Should they be 2.5% annually? Should they be this, that, and the other? You know, we happen to think that's sort of a non-starter of an argument. The bottom line is that those graduation rates need to be continuous, and frankly, they need to be substantial. If we retreat from that, we believe we are shortchanging our kids. We're certainly shortchanging students of color, but we're shortchanging all of America's high school students. In terms of teacher quality, we also believe that, particularly in schools that are sort of your high-need schools, that the federal government should do everything it can to ensure that those kids have access to highly qualified teachers, highly effective teachers. It really doesn't matter what you want to call them, but at the bottom, at the end of the day, those great teachers and leaders have to be in those schools at the same rates that they are in other schools. And there are obviously a number of ways that that can be accomplished. There are lots of proposals around pay incentives, around assistance with home buying. All of those kinds of things are on the table, and the Campaign for High School Equity is very supportive of all those things, because at the end of the day, we believe those kids need to have access to those very highly prepared teachers. We're also very concerned about the degree to which high school students have access to, have equitable access to good learning conditions. As you very well know, all too often, kids of color and kids in low-income communities are relegated to the schools that don't have the best facilities, don't have the best teachers, and all these sorts of things that impact on a student's ability to learn and a student's ability to be successful, both in high school and beyond. And we believe that obviously is something that should be addressed. In fact, we were a little disappointed that a lot of the monies that were this was just released today or yesterday, I believe it was just put on the appropriations website today, did not include, from our standpoint at least, significant resources that would be targeted directly to high schools beyond just construction. So there are any number of things that can be done in our high schools to help young people be more prepared for college and more prepared for the modern workplace, and those are all things that we are very, very supportive of. I really can't say enough about this report. I would just that we agree with everything that's in it. We start a little bit sooner and don't place as much focus on college readiness. We certainly think that is important and a critical part of the discussion, but we start from the standpoint of making sure that our high schools are strengthened and resourced and have the capacity so that when those kids do graduate, they are in fact prepared for college and they are in fact prepared for work. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Michael. Mervyn?
Good afternoon. I guess I'll start with the answer to Mr. Waterson's question. I was a hip-hop artist, and a few years back released a song that actually charted Billboard, and was very proud of it at the time. Not now. If you look that song up, it's quite embarrassing. My mom, who's a school teacher, certainly didn't like it, but unfortunately that was a song that charted Billboard. With that in mind, I got a call some years ago from Dick Gordon with NPR Radio, and he said, "Are you the rapping principal?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." He said, "I want to interview you. Let's talk about school and the fact that you weren't on track for college," and I wasn't. The program that I work for, Abbott, Advancement via Individual Determination, does just that. It looks for students who are in the middle, and in the academic middle when I say middle, and they focus on taking these students, giving them the support for the rigor in the classroom that will put them in the courses that will prepare them for a four-year college or university. And back to my own personal story, you know, I was taking classes like welding and auto mechanics and really thinking to myself I was going to go on to college. Well, to my shock, at 12th grade, to have the counselor say, "You can't go to college," and it was a shock. My answer was, well, I'm going into rap music, plain and simple. Again, Mom being a public school teacher, she was my Abbott for me. When Abbott didn't exist on the East Coast, said, "No way, Jose," and we worked some things out. So I ended up in education, school teacher, assistant principal, middle school principal, high school assistant principal, middle school principal, and then most recently working for this organization. Abbott started about 30 years ago now in San Diego, California. A teacher by the name of Mary Catherine Swanson decided that the kids who were in high school that were doing extremely well had programs, basically programs for the gifted. Also, the kids who were failing, they had programs as well. Kids who were in the middle just sort of float through the system and fell through the crack in some cases, but basically they floated through the system. She wanted some support for these kids, and that's how the Abbott program came into existence. Currently, we're in about 4,000 schools across 45 states and 15 countries through the DOD's military school program. So Abbott has grown since it started so many years ago with Mary Catherine Swanson. We're about 110 employees, so we're not a huge company, but we do cover 45 states, 15 different countries. What we do with the program is we actually train. That's the premise. We train. And I have to say, Mary Ellen, that when I read the report, this really speaks to what we do. We truly look at making sure kids have the tools while they're in school to prepare them to move on to college. And you'd be surprised. I mean, having been in the position of working in the schools at several different levels, kids want to go on to college. A lot of them do. But they don't have it in themselves. They just don't have the courage, the know-how, for lack of a better word, to step out there and take the risks. And honestly, we as the adults should be playing our part, being the encouragement, being that tool of encouragement, showing them the path that's necessary to make sure they're on track to get into these colleges and universities. Now, should every kid have to go to college? Personally, and this is certainly not on behalf of Abbott, I don't think so. I mean, God bless us that we got kids out there who can fix those BMWs that some of us like to drive, and Lexus and Mercedes-Benz, the girls that go on and guys that go on to do hair in salons. I mean, and these folks make a good living. At the same time, should any kid come through the school system and not have the opportunity to attend the four-year college university? Absolutely not. Every kid should have the opportunity. At the end of the day, if they decide, you know what, this is what I want to do instead, I want to go straight into the military, that's fine. But for them to make a choice and not have that as one of the choices, attending a four-year college or university, is a terrible mistake, and it happens all too often in this country. So again, that's what the work of Abbott is about. We train our teachers, we train the principals when they sign on to the program to actually implement strategies in the classroom that are geared toward students being more organized, actually creating a relationship with amongst their peers within the schools. And also, the way we key into colleges is we ask that colleges provide tutors for the program. Abbott is not a before-school program. It's not an after-school program. It's a program that happens during the school day. There's an elective class that the kids participate in. There's an Abbott elective teacher, and there's also an interdisciplinary team of people, everything from the counselor to core subject area teachers and a school administrator, that all works to form the Abbott site team. And that site team is responsible for those group of kids that actually start out in this program. And at the end of the day, Abbott as a program isn't just for the Abbott students, but it's for their entire school. The whole premise is, once you implement the program with a group of kids, that the strategies that you use, Cornell note-taking, Socratic seminars, these strategies will grow and be used school-wide throughout the schools. We're real big on data. They have the data over the years to show that kids who get involved with the program, mostly minority students, economically disadvantaged students, but the kids who get involved with the program, they do see improvement for the most part. And the numbers are pretty convincing, really convincing. So that's who we are and what we do. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Templin.
Well, thank you. Hello to everyone. My name is Bob Templin. I'm the president of Northern Virginia Community College. We're a 6-campus urban community college across the Potomac with about 65,000 students. Mary Ellen, we're about at near our 5,000 student mark on our plan toward 10,000. I'm going to generally endorse the tone of the report that is here, but to ask that that we come down from the 50,000-foot level and come down into the trenches. And I want to be very specific and strategic about actions that can take place. I think that there is a strategic lever that could be focused on in this issue of cultivating college readiness and being successful with remediation. That this lever is the linkage between community colleges and high schools. And I say that for two reasons why it's a strategic lever. One, there's a community college that's associated with every high school in America. Now, the general report talks about higher education as a monolith, But the fact is most research universities have a spectrum that's much too broad. They don't have relationships with individual high schools that are community-based. Community colleges do. We're hooked at the hip, so to speak. Secondly, the majority of students that go into remediation, the majority of students that are at risk that go to college start at the community college. So if you're looking at the biggest bang for the buck, it makes sense to focus on this strategic point between high schools and community colleges. The second notion that I would have is that the idea of a pipeline is a useful metaphor, but I'd like to replace it with one that's more specific and talk about a relay race. If you think about a relay race, the baton is never passed until the next partner in the leg of the race has a firm control of it. And the partner runs alongside before the baton is given up and that part of the lap of the race is done. In higher education, or in education, we get to a certain point, stop, and then throw the baton at the next one, and we wonder why we don't catch it. We don't even agree upon where it is we'll be standing when the baton is thrown. And so I'm going to talk about two very promising efforts that I think are yielding empirical results to the issues that are being addressed. One of those is a local program that we've started that I think has significant promise. And the second one is a national program that, to help with college success of remedial students. So the first local program I'm going to talk about is Pathway to the Baccalaureate. I have some material that I've left on the table in the back, but I'm going to go right to the data and right to the results of Pathway to the Baccalaureate. The concept is that we begin working with high school students who are first-generation college goers, low-income minority students who are not on a college trajectory, but whose teachers see in the classroom that they have the capability, but aren't likely to go unless there is some intervention. And so the intervention is that the college places college counselors in the high schools. Teachers nominate these middle-tier students who often don't understand what the system is about and whose parents find it difficult to advise them. And this counselor enters into an agreement on behalf of the college and gets the parents and the students together and say, make the following promise. If you come into the program that we're going to outline for you, you do it step by step and do what we say, we guarantee your admission to George Mason University's baccalaureate program. You will come through NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College, but we will guarantee not only your admission, we'll guarantee that you'll be able to finance your higher education with the economic barriers being removed. Here are our statistics now that we're completing our fourth year. We have 2,800 students in 30 high schools. 93% of them meet the federal definition of at risk. 80% of them are non-white. 35% of these students are not only college ready, but taking college level subjects before they graduate from high school. 84% of them transition to college, and we have an 81 to 90% retention rate. Now, when those are compared to national data for the same characteristics, they're almost double the success rate of the population that we're talking about. The notion is very simple. You don't pass the baton until the partner's running alongside and has a firm hold. We do it through cohorts of case management where we offer only one choice, our way or no way. It's a highly structured cohort approach where students are not allowed to make excuses and they can't hide. We know where they are, we know what they're doing. In the 11th grade, we see that they're assessed for college readiness. If they're not on a college trajectory, then we help get them college ready. And if they make the transition after graduating from high school to the college and then in remedial programs, then we move to the second tier program I'm talking about. The second tier program is called Achieving the Dream. This is a national program sponsored by the Lumina Foundation that has 80 community colleges in 15 states, where it helps colleges to use empirical data to understand what works and what does not work in remediation, in particular, among at-risk students. So using this methodology, Northern Virginia Community College has identified from the literature, from research, from other institutions, 3 promising practices we're using to improve the success rate of at-risk students in remediation. The first of those is called a learning communities methodology, where a counselor and a teacher in a remedial subject pair up across 2 courses in the same cohort of students, where students are responsible not only for their own learning, but for the learning of others in the class. The second is a concept called supplemental instruction, where a student who has already successfully passed the course with the teacher retakes it with the same teacher, but now serves as a mentor to the rest of the class. And then the third approach that we see is mandatory student orientation for students during the first week of classes. As strange as that might sound, you know, the American education system is a wonderful system with lots of choices for those who are prepared and understand what the choices and consequences are. It's a horrible system if no one in your family's ever gone through it and you don't know what the choices or the consequences are. And so this notion of a structured pathway in a cohort in which the choices are pretty much made until the student is able to fly on their own is yielding us significant results. What we've seen so far as a result of our work in this remediation is that our students that are in this methodology, our success rate is 7 to 10% higher using that methodology than students that are not in that methodology. And so I'll recap again that I think the strategic levers in this dialogue that we're having are particularly between America's high schools and community colleges. That the notion of defining college readiness doesn't happen by a federal mandate that defines it for all schools, but between school systems that are defining where the end point and the beginning point of students are so that they transition successfully, and that there is an appropriate methodology led by Achieving the Dream to make sure that students in remediation are successful. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you very much, and I have to say I really liked your notion of a relay race. I've never heard it put quite that way before, and it's fantastic. I have a question for each of you here. One of New America's recommendations is to use federal dollars to incentivize states to come together to create national education college readiness standards. My question to you is, do you think national education standards are the way to ensure that every child in America, no matter where they live, graduates college ready? And if national standards is the answer, or one of the answers, is that something that should be mandated by the federal government, incentivized by the federal government, or should the federal government stay out of it and it remain a voluntary endeavor?
So let me just be honest and blunt. Like some of you, when I hear national, I'm a little hesitant. I'm a lot less hesitant and a lot more inviting about as relates to the notion of standards. I think there is a lot of promise there. I am one of those who happens to believe that as a practical matter, I would like to see standards developed and led by states, supported by the feds, but that those standards should be voluntary. And I think if we approach it in that fashion and we end up in a place where they are in fact common across states, so that the issue you raised earlier, where my daughter leaves from Maryland and moves to Missouri, she is in fact still progressing as she should. But in answer to the second part of your question about whether or not the feds should mandate those standards, I happen to think the federal government should not mandate those standards. I do think, however, that the federal government should incentivize those standards where possible and appropriate. I do think the feds should be a part of the conversation. One other piece I would say, though, and that is, I think however we end up, communities of color, communities from where those young people who are most adversely affected by the things that we're talking about, those communities have to be consulted in some really meaningful ways and have to be a part of this dialogue. And I think again, being very honest, that hasn't always happened. It's beginning to happen now, and I'm pleased about that. But I think that has to be a really important, critical part moving forward of how we deal with this issue.
Thank you. Mervyn?
Mary Ellen, I'm going to say that when you think about the public school system and the fact that they now push curriculum alignment, I think national standards are a good way to go. I will, however, say that it should be mandated, in my opinion. I feel like on every level, every aspect, there should be stakeholders at the table, and these people should design, these administrators from every level, college level, high school, middle school, elementary, pre-K, they themselves should work with folks from the federal level and come up with what these standards are going to be and agree on them. But at the end of the day, they should be mandated. I will agree with Mr. Watterson as far as the playing field hasn't been evenly set, and it never has been. So for the families that are economically disadvantaged, there would need to be some extra support as far as putting them on even playing grounds. And certainly, again, I feel like it should be mandated. But I do think it's a good idea.
Thank you.
I think the notion of incentivizing segments of education to be talking to each other in real ways is incredibly important, and that's not being done. I think that would be a positive step. But the notion of creating a standard approach to college readiness that does not recognize the huge variety of higher education would be oversimplifying a very complex problem. What part of higher education is college ready? Would we set it to the highest world-class standards, or would we set it to something other than that? And that has enormous consequences for people that are making the transition from high school to college. What I have seen that I think is much more fruitful is incentivizing a dialogue across the boundaries between different segments of higher education or of education. It's the transition points that we're missing, that we don't have conversations, that we're losing students. And I think that the transition point for a group of gifted students in a high school to a top-tier, highly selective research institution is a different conversation than it is between middle ability students who are not sure that they're going to college, and if they do, will go to a community college. I've been very encouraged with the receptivity of the public schools talking with us about the readiness of their students and what we need to do together to make sure they're successful. I would offer a different kind of idea about responsibility. That is, that the notion within education is that we're responsible for our students throughout their journey in education, not just the piece of it that we take. So that middle school principals, as part of their scorecard, are responsible for the academic progress and success of their students in high school. That high schools are responsible for not just getting students into college, but for the academic performance of students that are in college. This notion of high school as a springboard and holding high schools responsible for collegiate performance is a concept that an organization called College Summit is putting forward that I think has great merit. The notion of joint responsibility for students throughout their history in education is something that we can encourage through the use of data. Right now, it's very difficult to track a student from elementary school through graduate school and to watch their academic progress. Very few states, Florida is one of the few that we can do that. And yet, having the notion of schools measuring their success by the performance of their students after they leave school, I think is an incentive in its own right, far beyond what the incentive is now, which is let's count how many we get into college. Let's not worry about how well they do when they get there. Let's just see how many we can get in college. So I think that there are sets of incentives to formulate dialogue, that there are measures of accountability that could be incentivized without oversimplifying the notion that college readiness is a point in space that could be defined universally for all.
You know, that actually brings me to my second question, was I just wanted to get back to the recommendation having to do with data in requiring high schools and higher education to publicly, and I would say prominently, report on the progress of their students. Really what we have in mind here are, for instance, high schools should have to prominently report on their NCLB report cards how many of their students have to go on to, when they go on to college, have to take remedial courses. Colleges should have to report how many of their students who take remedial coursework pass that coursework, and then perhaps even more importantly, then go on to actually graduate or transfer to another university. Now, some would argue that this type of reporting is very burdensome. Others would say that it's an absolute necessity. So my question to all of you, and you to really have already answered this, is how do you feel about this kind of reporting? Is it time for this type of reporting?
My response would be, how could we not want that kind of information about the success of our system? Mm-hmm. It's like our current system is a metaphor that I heard one person use once, which is a blind man driving on a freeway. It's not the kind of system that we want, that we can talk with any certainty about how well it's performing if we don't have the data.
Yeah.
I would just agree wholeheartedly. In fact, I'll just say ditto. The one piece I would add, though, is that we need to make sure that whatever we do, we uncover ways to continue to involve other segments of our population in these discussions. I'm thinking specifically of Native students. You know, there are a whole set of regulations and practices that guide how Native departments of education get involved with a lot of these things. In many cases, because of a lack of technical assistance and resources that may or may not be available, very often those tribal departments of education will adopt the standards of the state where they exist, but oftentimes face great difficulty in terms of implementing a lot of that stuff. And so the only piece that I would add is that as we embark on this new way of doing things, that we continue to struggle mightily about ways of bringing others into this conversation, because ultimately wherever we end up, we should end up with a system that really serves well all of our kids.
Did you want to add anything, Marvin? Okay. Well, I had a couple of specific questions. Michael, your organization does a lot of advocacy work, and what's interesting about you is you're not only doing federal advocacy, you're doing advocacy at the grassroots level. Could you talk a little bit about your grassroots advocacy on this issue? Sure.
We happen to believe, I think, very strongly in this notion that many of you are probably familiar with Governor Bob Wise, who heads the Alliance for Excellent Education. But this notion of bounce back that he talks about, which basically translates into the degree to which you're able to move federal policy or move federal policy makers depends on the degree to which folks at the local level are motivated to reach out and touch them. Hence their perspectives, their policy preferences bounce back to Capitol Hill. And so what we've tried to do, the Campaign for High School Equity, is on the one hand, spend a lot of time educating policymakers about the options that exist around some of the kind of different policies they might consider, but also providing information to folks at the local level about what those options are, listening to them in very critical ways so that what we learn in turn informs what we talk about when we spend time on Capitol Hill. I was in California real briefly. We did an event in California, I guess, about a month or so ago. And one of the things that was very clear, I guess I sort of always knew this intuitively, but to see it represented in such a stark fashion there in this briefing that we did was really quite powerful. And that is, you know, very often, and most of you probably know this, very often parents are not aware of how far their kids actually are from where they need to be in terms of being ready for college. I mean, I have a niece who graduated from high school right here in Maryland, and like you were talking about earlier, spent the bulk of her sophomore and junior year taking cosmetology classes and other kinds of classes, and was reduced to tears when she realized that she wouldn't be able to get into college. You know, we were able to do a bunch of a variety of things to eventually get her in, and she's fine now. But I'm sitting there in this program in California and listening to parent after parent complain about the fact that all throughout high school, their kids are being steered towards lots of other kinds of cosmetology for math and stuff like that. And these are parents who, you know, they may be parents who do not speak English. They may be low-income parents that work 2, 3, and 4 jobs. And so they don't really have access to the kind of information to make sure that their kids make the right kinds of decisions as far as coursework is concerned. And so it just becomes a really awful and vicious circle. And so one of the things that we try to do at the campaign is to try to encourage policymakers to think about ways the federal government can involve itself in helping communities get better arrayed around student success. And that might involve things like providing better support for CBOs that provide after-school programs and things of that nature for kids, providing integrated supports for kids, coming up with creative ways to make sure that parents and communities have the kind of information they need about how their kids are doing, what's required of their kids in order to get into school, and those kinds of things. But in far too many communities, we're seeing that parents just don't have the information, and that's a failing on us.
Morgan, could you just, I know you touched upon it, but could you talk a little bit more about the actual services that you provide at Avid?
Sure, Mary Ellen. I'll try to run you through, I guess, a brief scenario of if a school district is interested in bringing Avid to their district. First, you need to understand that it's a situation and it's a contract between the school district and Avid itself, not individual schools, but the school district. The whole idea is that when a district buys into Avid, that the intentions are to implement Avid at several schools and not just one school in particular. Once a school decides to come on board or a district decides to come on board, they would send representatives from each school. And again, that's that Avid site team that I spoke about. In most cases, the site team is comprised of your 4 core subject area teachers, 1 person who's selected as the Avid elective teacher, a school counselor, and a school administrator. These people attend what's called a summer institute, and we do these every summer between the months of June up until early August, where we actually train the Avid curriculum to a group of teachers that range from about 2,000 at our 8 summer institutes that we hold throughout the U.S. And the Avid curriculum, again, it deals with students being organized. Cornell note-taking is a big piece of that, having Socratic seminars. We also talk about the hidden curriculum, and really there's a huge support factor because the Avid teacher, that person is trained as the Avid elective teacher, and they really, really become a second mom or second father in some cases to the students that they serve, because we do believe in creating that relationship. And a lot of times in education, we leave out the relationship piece. And that's a very important piece that we stress in Avid. So once the teachers and the administrators go through this training, they carry this curriculum back to the classroom, and at the start of the school year, they identify students that are deemed academically in the middle. And a lot of times, going back to Mr. Watterson, a lot of these students are first-generation college students. When he speaks about parents who really don't know the system that well, often, more times than not, these parents haven't attended 4-year colleges and universities, so they don't know. And a lot of our Avid students are first-generation college students. And once they get into this curriculum, it's usually at the middle school level. They remain in Avid up until their senior year when they graduate. So it starts at middle school, it goes on through the 12th grade, and most recently, Mary Ellen, we've started implementing Avid Elementary, which starts with 4th graders. And that's something that's fairly new. We have quite a few schools out west and just starting to have a few pop up here on the East Coast.
Great.
Okay.
President Templin, one of the things that I find most interesting and inspiring about NOVA is that you don't wait for students to graduate high school before you engage them. My question for you is, what did it take to get to get your community college into the high schools. Is it really that hard to get people to come together? Obviously, that's what we would advocate here. That's what we would certainly hope we could inspire. But what did it actually take to get the two of you to come together, the two sectors?
Well, it was stimulated by a community activist who brought together a new school superintendent together with the community college president and the university president in the same area, and asked the question, why is it that we can't all collaborate as one system? Mm-hmm. And from that conversation, it appeared to me that for the reasons that I said, that the majority of students that don't make it from high school to college successfully often start out at a community college, or they require remediation at the community college. I saw the community college serving as a linchpin. It was not realistic to expect the university to become involved on a day-to-day basis. It couldn't scale up. It couldn't handle it. But at the community college level, it's a reasonable thing for us to do at the molecular level, and then let us manage the relationship with the universities, which we do. We have guaranteed admissions with over 30 different institutions, and no high school can manage that on their own. So the community college playing a linchpin was a very powerful notion for me. And as a consequence of that, we started looking at the data. And the data were that even in Northern Virginia, a very affluent community with great school system, the majority of our students coming to Northern Virginia Community College were requiring remediation. Even though they had passed the standards of learning, even though they had passed the national assessments, No Child Left Behind, there were factors that were incongruous between what we expected and what they were learning. We found out that college admission tests are not an indication of college readiness. In fact, there is no standard. We found out that our assessment instrument that we're using, we use to sort students, not to do diagnosis. So now we've pushed those to the 11th grade. And we're working with our students while they're in the 11th grade to do the assessment diagnostically, saying, where is it that you're weak on your trajectory so we can correct it while you're still in high school? Now, I would have to say that the next parts of our agenda are about two other things that you don't mention that I think are critical. About 10% of these students that we work with, even though we've made great progress, about 10% of them don't make the transition from high school to post-secondary education, and we have no option for them. I mean, it is a reality in many of our families that young people have personal responsibilities and family responsibilities that prevent them, and they're very complicated, prevent them from immediately going on to college. We lose them. In fact, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have identified the 18 to 25-year-old out-of-school youth population as our lost group, a national resource. So we need a method of creating an alternative for them, transitioning from high school with a high school diploma into something that solves the need that they have but keeps them in the system. And a good example of one model that's very promising that we're working with at an early stage is an organization called Year Up. Year Up is an alternative for those that have recently graduated from high school to go into almost an apprenticeship type of relationship with a community-based organization, apprenticeship, learning IT skills for certification, and then placement on the job for a 6-month period. But the key relationship for us is that it is a college-affiliated program where those students, while the major focus that they have is earning money and getting a skill, they're earning college credit while they're going through that program. And the deal should be with the employers that hire them to encourage them to continue their education and provide tuition reimbursement for them, so that we, in effect, have a recovery program. This is a resource that we can't afford to lose. Mm-hmm. And so I think creating an alternative for those that don't make the transition, even in a tight system, that don't make the transition, aren't lost to us. Because like the middle ability student, they fall through the cracks. And once they're out, we forget them.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to open it up now to the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Sir?
Fritz Edelstein, Public-Private Action. I really have two. One, I'm a little concerned that there was confusion about how low we wanted to set the bar, given the conversation, and then President Templeton talked about alignment in terms of the piece. The conversation for the question you asked, Mary Ellen, having to do with whether it's national, federal, or what, the concern is, given the answers, how low we want to set the bar or how high we want to set the bar. And I'm curious, it's going to be question one, how low you want to set the bar, given some of the answers. The second piece is, I think we all agreed that not everybody is going to go to college. And the only time the word post-secondary education was used in any of the conversation was just now by President Templeton. And I don't want to get into a semantical argument, but I guess one is to the question of, part of it is to the question of the title of the report versus, are we talking about post-secondary education, or are we only talking about 2- and 4-year colleges and universities? That's not clear. And if it is talking about post-secondary, then it's a different kind of conversation than just kids going to college. Or what are we talking about, and what are your feelings about it?
So the second part of the question directed at us or Mary Ellen?
Yeah,
Okay. Let me just comment.
I'll go after you.
Mary Ellen, on the title of the report. The second is...
I mean, certainly here at New America, we want every child to graduate college and workforce ready, and we'd like students to have the opportunity to graduate ready for a 2-year or a 4-year university. You know, what we would really, we're looking at public universities, public community colleges. That's the bar for us.
I'm sorry. So for CHSE, just the standards piece, you know, like a lot of groups that are involved in this conversation, as an organization, as a coalition, we haven't crafted a hard and fast position just yet. Our individual organizations are involved in the conversation at different levels, but I think, you know, I don't think I would be creating too much of a stretch if I were to say that I think we are leaning in the direction of the notion that standards should in fact be fewer, they should in fact be higher, they should be internationally benchmarked, yada, yada, yada. Much of this you all have heard, I'm sure. But I think the only sort of sticking point for us, probably once we really get into this as a coalition, is going to have to do with the question I think that you asked earlier, Marilyn, which is two things: the role that the federal government should play, and then 2, who should be a part of the conversation, who should be involved in the conversation. That's why I was saying earlier that I really think that a critical, we stand to possibly miss an important moment if we don't appropriately engage communities of color. And unfortunately, I think that's been done in the past.
I'm just going to speak on the piece about how high we should set the bar. In all honesty, and it goes back to something I said earlier, the idea that entities at different levels are even thinking about working together is a great start. I don't think we can even say what's low, what's middle, what's high until across levels we come together and really bring people from each particular section to talk about the bar and what's going to be the bottom, what's going to be the middle, what's going to be extremely high. Once that process happens, then we can talk about setting the bar. That's my personal take on it, but certainly I'd say we want to set it high at the end of the day.
The question that you ask is a really difficult and challenging one. From a theoretical perspective, it's pretty easy to answer, but from a on-the-ground level, it's very complicated and difficult. I would say that we want our universities to set the bar very high, and we want all of our students to aim toward that when they graduate from high school. We want the level at the community college level to be rigorous also, but not necessarily in the same way, but would lead toward achievement of those levels if the individual is university bound. But this is where the nature of the community college changes a little bit, because we do embrace and encompass post-secondary education. And it's quite possible, working with high schools and in the post-secondary arena, for students to learn college-level, university-level skills in math and science and communication, not by the traditional classic methods that we've used, but through the application of knowledge, the integration of STEM, if you will, into applied subjects where students who before thought they weren't capable can, through the application of knowledge, see the relationship between the concept and the application. And so I would say that that the danger of adopting one standard is that we fail to recognize that in our economy and in our collegiate setting, the reality is that there are individuals who require post-secondary training. All of our students must have some form of post-secondary education if they're to be competitive workers with a livable wage, and that it takes advanced knowledge and skill, but maybe not the same or at the same time. For example, when we started out, and with all due respect to my colleagues, there was a bias against those who work on automobiles. But the fact is, if you're a successful BMW mechanic today, you have to have understanding of advanced concepts of physics, electronics, mathematics, and chemistry if you're going to be successful. In fact, if you are a fully certified mechanic, you're quite capable, if you can make the transition of the application of those concepts to the theory, of progressing further. And in fact, I hope that as a society we encourage that. So I would hope that we could develop different templates rather than a national standard. A template that would guide a state and a region in a conversation between the different players of education about what it is they expect and what they're seeing, and that we shine the light of data to inform the progress or the gaps, and that watchdog organizations and our elected officials ask why is this happening, why does it have to continue, and that we create incentives for those to come together rather than a national mandate focusing on a laser light, which sounds good, but doesn't speak to the vast majority of our students.
You know, and I just want to build on that for a moment, because really we talk oftentimes about graduating college or workforce ready, and it's really graduating college and workforce ready. Just getting back to your point, when you're talking about, even if a student doesn't go on to college, they're still going to need those college-ready skills. They're going to need a certain proficiency in math. They're going to need the communication skills. So in many cases, they really are, at the end of the day, the same to be successful in this economy. Anyone else?
I'm Jerome Dancis. I'm a retired mathematics professor. And from the perspective of a mathematics professor, to be college ready requires, I guess, two things. One is to be able to read and comprehend the social studies textbook and be able to write a coherent summary of it. And second, to be competent in arithmetic and algebra 1. That's it. So to organize a pipeline, I would see, well, yes, this. If the high schools would replace or greatly reduce the literature in the English courses and instead concentrate on being able to teaching the students how to comprehend their social study, their history textbook and maybe their science textbook, perhaps that would make them more college ready. In math, 20 years ago, the school math curriculum was aligned with college. And it's, in the last 20 years, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics have put out what's a national curriculum. It's not a federal curriculum, but it's a national curriculum, which is unaligned, which unaligned the schools with college. And I'll provide you with the data with my state of Maryland.
Is there a question?
Oh, well, you may comment on these things, but that's.
Okay.
But I think the data is useful, and then I'll stop. 10 years ago, among the white students who graduated from Maryland high schools, 67% were ready for college math. Now that's dropped to 60%. Among African Americans, it was 44% that were ready for college math. That's dropped to 33%. So one could get a considerable improvement by just going backwards 10 years.
Let me jump in just for a second, Jerry, and see if I can pull something, because I think you and I have talked about this phenomenon before. But just correct me if I'm wrong. Did I hear you, am I hearing you suggest that perhaps, I'm sorry, I have a bad habit, folks. Did I hear you suggest that perhaps at some level there should be less emphasis placed on English and literature and things of that nature, and a little bit more placed on math and science? So, okay, then I apologize. I thought that's what I heard. But let me just offer this then. In terms of a college-ready definition, I think we all agree that there is we are not yet at the point where there is sort of a common agreement across all the states about what that means. I think we are in agreement that that's somewhere we need to move. But I certainly think that that definition has to include very heavy focus on math skills and abilities, science skills and abilities, English, literature, writing, critical thinking, those kinds of things. So exactly how we eventually come to a point where we arrive at a definition, if it involves all of that, then I think we'll be fine.
I think we're going to actually move on. We're going to move on to another question. Thank you. Any other question, ma'am?
Hi, my name is Sonia Crocker, and I'm with the Public Education Network. And my question is directed towards Mr. Templin and Mr. Jenkins. You said that your programs identify students that are in the middle tier bracket of high school and middle school students. And I'm wondering, of the students that are identified, how many are asked to participate in the program and how many actually accept that offer? And for that middle tier students, I've noticed that they have a low motivation level, some of them. What kind of techniques do you use to motivate those students to actually go through with the program?
Thank you, and good question. With the AVID program, we specify that the students, as well as the teacher who's teaching the elective, have to volunteer to participate. So if a student says, that's not for me, I don't want to be a part, then we don't force them into the program. But we do set it up where there's an information session for students, because a lot of times they just don't know. And I can tell you from working it as an administrator, the problem we had is that earlier I alluded to the fact that AVID has to happen during the regular school day. Well, because it was written in as an elective, a lot of kids would lose space in a class like, say, art, PE, music, and they take the AVID elective in its place. And that was a huge hurdle to try and cover. But again, with the information sessions that we had, family nights that we had, and also students who were already involved with the program, a lot of times we implement the program at the high school and we work backwards to the middle school and eventually to the elementary students. And it's a great thing when those high school students or students who've been in AVID and have gone on to college can come back and talk to these students that are thinking about starting the program, that have just started the program, or about to graduate from the program. They can actually hear from their peers, this is how this program helped me. This is how it changed my studying habits. This is how it made me more willing to step into the social network of the school environment. So no, students aren't required to be a part of the program. Certainly it's voluntary.
You've raised a really good question that I don't have an easy answer for. And the question is, what about the students that might be identified but don't actually participate? Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have many more students wanting to participate than we can accommodate. And so I think we lose sight of those who maybe are right on the edge that could be brought over that don't, and then those that we lose altogether. one of the ways that we try to motivate students is to have them and their parents are key to this because it involves their parents as well, is that when we induct them into the program while they're still in high school in the 11th grade, we conduct that induction, that organizational meeting with the parents and the child, not in the high school, not at my college, but at George Mason University. And we say to the parents and to these students, this is where you're going to college. Parents, this is where your children will be studying. And the only question is, you know, can we stick together and make this happen? But it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen. So what we do is we try to place them in the environment so they see college students walking around them saying, God, I mean, it's very scary. It's the first time in their life that they've ever imagined they might be that way. And for parents who have never gone to college or university, for most of the parents, it's the first time they've ever been to a university. And this is something that creates an enormous motivation on their part to insist that their children, in effect, do what we're counseling them to do. So when we write a letter back home, we say, we need for you to make sure that they're not taking that elective that they want to take, but they're taking 2 math courses so that they're college ready. And the parents say, well, you know, I don't even speak English that well, but if they say you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And we can count on that parental support. So I would say the 2 things, having students project ahead to being something that they never imagined, and secondly, using that parental support to reinforce that this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to do.
Thank you. Sir, in the back.
My name is Dmitry Novik. I'm maybe from another planet. But explain to me how the student who is not ready to be college student became college student. It's the main question. All other question is some details.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's part of the failure of the system, that these students are being passed along in the first place.
What system of failure? It's unbelievable to listen and some philosophical problem about. It's no philosophical problem. It's who accepts the student who is not ready.
Well,
My college accepts those that are not ready.
yeah.
Because it's possible at any stage of your life to suddenly find a potential that was missing when you were younger. And so we continue to provide opportunities for people throughout the lifespan and to make up the deficiencies. I would venture to guess that if this group went through my assessment right now, more than half of you would require remediation. But we would not give up on you as a consequence. It's been a long time since I've had a math course, and I would not want to take our math assessment. And so, you know, oftentimes we're watching people who, the majority of the population growth in this region is due to immigration. People who had a variety of educational experiences, now who are adults who want to continue to progress. And so we need a system with multiple intake points, assessments, providing what's needed, but making sure that it's achieved at the level that's required in order for the student to be gauged as successful.
Time for one last question. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Maureen Bedetti, and I work for the private colleges, and I've gone to both to private and public colleges, and taken courses at community colleges as well. I guess my question, and I wanted to give it a little reference, is that I was the first in my family to go to college. I mean, I was really, I'm the oldest of all the siblings, and my mother, who was the salutatorian of her high school class, didn't have the opportunity to go to college, and my father went to a technical college. But somehow I knew from the time I was young that I was supposed to go to college, and I don't know where that came from. I went to Catholic schools, and what I see in a lot of what you describe is both the need for structure and clear assistance is something that maybe in those kinds of schools, and why the private colleges actually have the best graduation rates and success rates with students of all categories, no matter what their, I don't know how you say it, but if they're low-income minority students, single mothers, whatever, we tend to get them through the best. And it may be that sort of community, which I hear you in some way describing in a way that the publics would have to do it. So I'm wondering if you see ways of involving private schools, or do you see parallels in what that type of education provides in what you're doing?
Well, that's, I'm assuming you're directing at least part of that to me. And
Right.
so part of the beauty of the American system of education is our diversity, just like our people. And trying to find one kind of institution or one standard that fits all is really a gross oversimplification. Our private institutions, because they are different, because they are often able to offer personal attention, often because they also create a new setting to surround the student, and in a way never before, can lead to a set of outcomes for those students that are remarkable, and we should encourage that wherever we can. For the vast majority of people that we're talking about, though, that's probably not an option to start, although it should be an option to consider, and it's not an either-or. We have a very large number of our students coming through the Pathway program that start at the community college, and then through our great relationships with private institutions go there, and there's a special niche that they fill. And so the question is, it's not a matter of making this a homogeneous system, but mapping the right fit. And my experience is that's not mandated. It can be incentivized, and it ultimately is about relationships, just as you mentioned, whether the relationship is between a teacher and a student or faculty between institutions. And we have to encourage those. We have to grow what I call capillaries that are between institutions, where you leave one system and you join another, and the institutions themselves have to form them through personal relationships. It's hard work. It's messy work. It's not easy to talk about, and you can't describe it in federal legislation. But that's where the real work happens. And it happens between public institutions, within public institutions, between private and public institutions, and private institutions themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I really think what you're getting at is really this idea of social capital, and that's exactly what the Pathways to Baccalaureate program is doing. That's what AVID is doing, is providing that social capital. Would anyone else like to comment?
There is one other area that we have ignored. It's a little bit like the recovery program I talked about, but the parallel is identical, and we're not talking about it at all. One of the huge areas in our country today is the area of adult literacy, and especially new residents that come to our land and are studying for the GED with the idea that they will receive post-secondary education when they complete the GED. There is no conversation going on between the traditional GED program and higher education. And yet, I went to a GED graduation last spring in which there must have been 400 graduates and from all over the world. And as they came, they read out their name and read out what their plans were. And their plans were, by and large, to come to my college. And the fact was, they're not ready to come to my college. And we're not prepared to make their transition smooth. Even though we've been working with the traditional programs, we've not established a strategy in our adult population so that those who didn't complete high school and want to do it and do so and can make the transition as well.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers here today for sharing your time and your experiences. And I'd also like to put out a special thank you to the entire education policy team who's done a lot of work on this, and a special thanks to Steve Bird, one of our senior fellows, and Ulrich Boser, who are the authors of the report. Thanks for coming today.